Give me 1 second. Hilula for the Piacetzner.
How's the spell checking?
Setzner. To put it in a few times, you know. Forward, and we're good. Okay. Okay. There's a lot of different things that are kamavan weighing on a person's heart when it's simultaneously the yurtzeit of a very great man who had a profound effect on your heart. Happens to also be that my grandfather's yurtzeit was also yesterday, Wednesday, which he shares the yurtzeit with the Piacetzner. So our learning should be Le'ilin Nishmaso as well. And but it's also Parshas Noach, and it's also a hemshech of what we spoke about last week in Cheshvan. And so last week we spoke a little bit about the inyan of being a yachid. That Tishrei is more the inyan of being part of a tzibur. It's this inyan of Hallel together and the Yom Noraim together and the Rov Am Hadras Melech Rosh Hashanah is being Mamlech Hashem, and everything is about Berov Am and Kol Yisrael Ru'uyin Lios B'Sukkah Achas, and everything is about the Tzibor and being together. And Cheshvan is from a lashon of Chashu, like Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch pointed out, a lashon of Chashu, of whispering, Nun Sofit all the time, like a Lamdan, a Leitzan, a Gazlan, who do it all the time. Chashu means Cheshvan means to do it all the time, to be whispering all the time. And whispering is something that you do when you're more not in the crowd. And so I thought maybe as a hemshech of that, it's also the Piacetzner's yurtzeit, and I want to speak a lot about that. But to begin from a place of where we left off last week, and to speak about this idea of being in Cheshvan and that being a time to focus more on being an individual as opposed to being part of the tzibur. So as the Torah from Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in the Sefer Har Tzvi, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank writes on the pasuk, "Vatishaches haaretz lifnei Elokim, vayar Elokim es haaretz v'hinei nishchata," that the earth became nishchat in front of God, and Hashem saw that the earth was mushchas. The world became totally depraved. And so Tzvi Pesach Frank asks the question, why is it that we have this double language of hashchasa? Why do we have the earth became mushchas before Hashem, and Hashem saw that it was like that? So Tzvi Pesach Frank writes that what happened is that in the beginning, things started to decline, and things were not so simple in the world. And the world became decrepit. So it came to a point where all of a sudden, Vayar Elokim, that only Hashem recognized that there was anything wrong anymore. In other words, people became so influenced by this corrupt society that they started to think that this is the new normal. To the point that if somebody would come up to them in the middle of the street and say, "Your money or your life," they would take their wallet out of their pocket, they would give it to the guy, they wouldn't think for a second that there was anything abnormal about it. He's stronger than I am. You know, survival of the fittest. It's no different than a lion doesn't come up to a zebra and say like, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to eat you now, right? So it became so normal, this way of looking at the world, like the Torah describes, that the Bnei Elukim came and they took whatever daughters they wanted and they just had their way around things, and it became so bad that it was only, that's what the double lashon is. Things became bad, and they became so bad that it only in front of Hashem it became bad. It became so bad that the society, the tarbut, became so corrupt. The culture became so corrupt that people they didn't know how to distinguish anymore between what's right and what's wrong. We're sure people can get onto the link if they try to get on. Because last time Yisachar was saying, I don't know how this works, but Yisachar was saying last time they were trying. What's that? They have to be admitted. They have to be admitted. So far, I don't see anybody necessarily, but I just sent it to a bunch of. We'll keep our eye on it. So, the Piacetzner Rebbe, one of the cornerstones of his thought was this Indian of being an individual, being a gever. And being a gever means thinking for yourself and being an individual. And for those who are not familiar, the Piacetzner Rebbe was someone by the name of Klenomis Kalman Shapiro. Zecher Tzadik Kodesh Levrach Hashem Yinkom Damo. He was murdered by the Nazis. He was the Rav of the Warsaw ghetto during the Holocaust, during those years, and led his tzibor valiantly after losing his own son. After his son was bombed, his son was not well, he was ill, and he was in a little field hospital, Ki'ilu, in the Warsaw ghetto, and the Germans came with planes and bombed the hospital, killing everyone inside, including his son. And the Piacetzner said after that happened, he said, I already lost the war, but Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, the Jewish people will continue and continue to shepherd our sheep. And he had many opportunities to escape, and he stayed and was killed al Kodesh Hashem together with the tzibor when the ghetto was liquidated. And the Rebbe has a number of amazing seforim. Just to go through, I didn't bring all of them, but I brought some. So he was the Rav of Piacetzner, a town called Piacetzner, where he was a mechanech, really. That was his expertise. He was a master pedagogue. And he wrote a sefer called Chovas HaTalmidim, which is very famous, which is basically an introduction to Avodas Hashem, B'derech HaBaal Shem Tov probably, but Avodas Hashem as the Piacetzner Rebbe saw it, for elementary school students. Chovas HaTalmidim, the student's obligation. And in it, he writes both to teachers and to the students, how should an elementary school student view himself and his relationship with the Jewish people, with Torah, with Hashem, his midos. Then, after that, he wrote a sefer called Hachsharas HaAvrechim, which is for the next level student, an avrech, for a young man, maybe young married man, perhaps not, and a young avrech. And that's like the next level. It's like after you've mastered the Chovas HaTalmidim. That's what he writes explicitly in Hachsharas HaAvrechim, that after you've mastered the Chovas HaTalmidim, then you can go on to Hachsharas HaAvrechim. It's a little more intellectual, trying to explain the underpinnings of what does it mean to be an Oved Hashem. And then he has a very skinny little kuntras called B'nei Machshava Tova, which was actually under a cherem during his lifetime, that only people with express permission were able to be given copies of this little manuscript. It was for small groups of people who wanted to be part of an elite, kind of like black ops, of Oved Hashem. That had in the beginning, the opening chapter is, here are the rules, for being in a spiritual fight club. Yeah, exactly. Here are the rules for being in spiritual fight club, including that you can't tell anyone about it, including the fact that you can't think that you're better than anyone else for being in this, including the fact that you have to bear your darkest secrets to the Chabura and work on it together, and all types of unbelievable things. And he did not expect this. He said, this is for Echad Mina Elef. This is for 1 in 1,000. After he passed away, the Talmidim said, what are we going to do? We have to publish the Rebbe's writings. And they wrote, he's probably not happy about this, but. And then there's a sefer. We obviously have the Aish Kodesh, after which the famous, he's called the Aish Kodesh sometimes. That's his drushos that he gave literally during the Holocaust, from the years of the Holocaust. the drushos, he got up in front of the shul in the Warsaw ghetto with planes flying overhead and people dying left and right and starving to death, and spoke to his community and tried to shepherd them. And we have those drushos. And then finally, what I have here, which I'm going to really spend most of the time focusing on tonight, is the Sefer Tzav V'Zirus, which is printed in the back of Achsharas Avreichim. It's hard to even call it a Sefer, because this is the whole thing. This is the Tzav V'Zirus section, which is more or less the Rebbe's diary. It's the Rebbe's diary. It's not clear if he wanted to publish it or not, like when he was writing it. It's clear that he wanted it published after the fact. It was found after the Holocaust by a non-Jewish construction worker in a milk carton, buried under the ground near where the Rebbe was hiding out at the end, together with a note that said, whoever finds this, and it's a whole miraculous story how it was found and how the guy didn't obviously read Hebrew, certainly not Yiddish, and he and it said, whoever finds this, please bring it to somebody who speaks Hebrew, and then they'll decipher the rest of the letter, and the letter says, if you get your hands on this, please send it to my brother in Palestine. It says, please send it to my brother who's in Palestine, that maybe he'll be able to print some of these works that'll be able to survive the war, so that my life's work shouldn't be for nothing. Not for nothing, but that it should have kiyum. So I want to just begin by reading some of the thoughts of there's nothing else in Jewish literature that's could be compared to this. It's the literal diary of an admor, of a literal tzaddik, of a person who ate, breathed, slept, avodas Hashem, Klal Yisrael, working on himself, So I had the good fortune of being in someone's house today, socially distanced with a mask, and they had a copy of, I also have it somewhere, I couldn't find it, I haven't looked at it in a long time, but a number of years ago somebody translated Tzav V'Zirus as to heal the soul, and I figured that I would just grab it in case it was in the Hebrew one. I was able to just read it and I didn't have to translate, but here I figured it would save time by reading it in English. It's very well done, the translation, and it'll come across more in the Rebbe's voice if I just read it without doing my own translation and kind of just letting the poetic nature of the Rebbe's voice carry itself. So we begin with entry number 7, and they're short. All the entries are very short, so excuse me for reading in English. As a torrent river surges forth, sweeping with it all that lies in its path, penetrating into deep recesses and washing away all buried things, so does the torrent of public opinion sweep along the individual mind. You may not know it, you may even deny it, but you've been brainwashed by common belief. He's writing to himself. Carried along perhaps more, perhaps less, you now think along these twisted paths. So stay away from the middle of the river, don't be concerned what people say, but this alone will not protect you, because you cannot completely seclude yourself. Who can vouch that your wife or children will not be swept along with the flow? Will they then be the open floodgates that bring the floodwaters inside your doors? And who can abstain from breathing the air that carries the germ of public opinion? Thoughts and opinions are beyond time and space and flow from mind to mind in quantum leaps. In the Hebrew, he talks about how it literally seeps in through your nostrils and through the pores in your skin. That's the lashon that he uses in the original. I guess the translation is not as in Hebrew. I'm reading the translation, but the translation missed that. Nor can you remain static in this torrent river just by standing firm in your place. You must actively swim against the flow. You may not be successful in swimming upstream, but at least you will not be swept downstream by the flow. So it is with the spiritual life and the purity of spirit that you have attained. You cannot retain them against the flow unless you continue to struggle for spiritual growth. You must swim upstream without respite, upward, onward against the flow. There may be a limit to how far you can go, but at least you will not be drawn down with the flow. This mimer of the Rebbe, which echoes so much the opposite of the Dor Mabul, it was already at a point where everyone was carried completely downstream to the point. As I was sharing this with the Chevra in Hebrew, maybe in the zchus of speaking in Lashon HaKodesh, I wanted to share with them another teaching from Tzvi Pesach Frank. It was an amazing pshat in a halacha in Yeridea. And as I was reading it, Hashem gave me a matana that we find that the tzaddikim, this might sound like a wild thing for people who are not mulumad b'zeh or not ragil b'zeh, but the tzaddikim had this preoccupation, really finds itself mostly in the seforim of Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin. He was which is really based on a teaching from the Ishbitzer that he learned from his Rebbe, that even in academic scholarship is referred to as, there's a name for it, it's called omni-significance. Or in the language of the Maharal, who was probably the granddaddy of all this, he said, Dvarim gedolim ein b'mikra. Big things are not by accident. Ad kedei kach, that everything in Torah, everything related to Torah is b'ashkacha pratis. Like Rav Tzadok says, it's not a mistake that the Gemaras that deal with Chorban HaMikdash are in Gittin. Like the Agaritas that deal with Chorban HaMikdash are in Gittin because there's a disillusion of the marriage between Hashem and Am Yisrael. And Dafka, the Gemaras, the Agaritas of Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael are on Ksubas. At the end of Ksubas, the Gemaras about rolling on the dust of Eretz Yisrael, it's on Ksubas. And the Gemaras about Matan Torah are in Shabbos, in Peches. About all the Gemaras about the Agaritas Matan Torah, because everyone agrees that even though we don't know the calendar date of the Matan Torah, Kula Modim that it was Nitna B'Shabbos. V'chulu. Ad kedei kach, Rav Tzadok even explains why different simonim in Shulchan Aruch are what they are. That I'll say that this simon in Shulchan Aruch is this because it's being miramis to this inyan. It's called omni-significance. Again, it gets, the more you're, I guess the less you're mamin, the harder it is to swallow that. I mean, he's not suggesting, by the way, that Rav Yosef Karo was doing that on purpose. He's saying that it was b'ashkacha pratis, even b'lidas the Mechaber, even b'lidas the Rambam. Ad kedei kach that you find the Bnei Yissaschar and others that they'll say that the Rambam counted mitzvah, 95 is the mitzvah of Binyan Beis HaMikdash because 95 is b'gematria Kisei David. V'chulu, So as I was sharing this with them, I noticed Shulchan Aruch Yeridea Siman Nun Ches Seif Zayin, Noach Zayin, V'havein. Listen carefully. Noach, in all the Pshat Mefarshim even, this is big in, try to take from everything, especially in the Gush, and those who are the experts in Pshat and Chumash. That's where they're in Yeshivat Har Tzion. So there's a lot of talk about the Noach and the Yonah and how they're like playing off of each other in the same way that Bilam and his own donkey, a person and their animals, it's like a very special thing in the Torah, the way that they, Chava and the Nachash, or Adam and the Nachash really, how they reflect each other. Yonah Matzah Bama Noach and Yonah and the Yonah. So listen carefully with that in mind. That Noach is this Yonah that's looking for Manoach. And the Zohar says that Noach is Bechinas Shabbos, whereas Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov correspond to Pesach, Shavuos, that's already in the Torah. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov correspond to Shavuos, to Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. So Noach is Shabbos. Noach is the secret of Shabbos, the Zohar says. So Noach Zayin. This is in Noach Zayin or that. Lefachot, even if you want to say that Dovidl, you drank one too many shots, lefachot, it's a good way to remember it. Okay, so listen to this. As I was reading it, I started, and then I had I'll share it in a second. So Zakt Mechaber, Of shenichbat al pnei hamayim. Let's say you're out on a hunting trip and you shoot a bird out of the sky. Like the old, I don't know if you guys had Nintendo, but the old Nintendo, duck hunt. That's like the one game you have the gun for, is like, that's very geschmack. So, you shoot the duck, and it falls, and the dog, and the whole thing, and it falls into the water, falls into a river. Ducks hang out by the river. Oh, shenichvat al pnei hamayim. It falls into the river. Im shot malei kol masam imata lamala l'umas hamayim in choshen lo. If it's swimming against the tide, if it's swimming against the downstream, the bird is being pushed downstream, and it's swimming mamish upstream against the stream, then you know that bird ain't choshen lo. You don't have to be choshish that it's a treifa. Meaning you could still shecht it because you shot it. If it has enough koach to be able to swim upstream, then you know that it's not a treifa. You could still shecht it and eat the bird without doing a bedika to see if it was a treifa based on your original pigia. Aval im shot b'malim milamala lamata. But if it's swimming downstream, if it already gave up swimming upstream and it's already swimming downstream, im hilu chamayim, it goes together with the zerem, goes together with the flow. Choshishin lo v'tzarach bedika. Then you need to check it to make sure it didn't become a treifa. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank says that how do you know if you're alive? How does a Jew know if he's alive? He's Davak Hashem. He's swimming upstream. He's swimming upstream. He's still alive. It's not a treifa. He's still. And then I thought, and then after that, mitzvah goreres mitzvah, that Noach matzachein bein Hashem. Noach matzachein bein Hashem. Noach's whole thing was to be able to flip and go upstream. That Noach matzachein bein Hashem is able to go against, and ad kidei kach that it's the exact opposite. That the whole world was nishchas lifnei Hashem. The whole world, nobody could recognize that there's anything. Noach couldn't care less about anything else. He was flowing upstream bein Hashem. That's all he cared about. So the Piacetzner spoke about this all over the place. He spoke about this harbe. Back to Tzavazir's. In Osiyud Bays, in entry 12, I have the English here. In entry number 12, they're shorter ones, so. Yes, that was the point. Yeah, Chaim. Yes. Chaim is Noach backwards because he is the koach that. So in Osiyud Bays, the Rebbe has a beautiful explanation of, there are 48 Kinyanei Torah. The Mishnah and Avos talk about 48 Kinyanei Torah. And the one of them is Hamakiris Makomo. Hamakiris Makomo. Haman wasn't Makiris Makomo, he jumped Kofitz Larosh. Makiris Makomo, the Sanhedrin was made in such a way that they sat in a semicircle and it was in order of the katan to the gadol. Right? So that's, the katan's supposed to speak, if you're sitting with a bunch of people and you have an expert in something, you speak first before the expert speaks so that they could correct anything and you shouldn't be influenced by what that person said. So, what do you think? If he already said, if the expert already said, so Makiris Makomo needs nowhere to sit, know when to talk first, know when not to talk first. In the Sanhedrin, you speak first. When you're sitting with a bunch of experts, maybe you don't speak first. It's like, you have to know Makiris Makomo. The Rebbe has an inversion of this teaching, like so many great teachings. Makiris Makomo have osel pol ba'olam v'hanak lo mituvcha al shetamim. He's writing to himself again. Clonimus saying to himself, make sure that you ha'anek lo mitovcha at shetamin makomcha ba'olam yanikar. Hamakiris Makomo means let your place be made known. Make yourself known to the world. Don't lose out on the possibility of introducing the world to the unique light that you bring. That in the same way that Rabbi Nachman said about himself, Chidush kamoni lo haya ba'olam, there was never such a chiddush like me in the whole world. Like all the mashpiyim of Breslov explained. Rabbi Nachman wasn't talking about himself. He was trying to teach every Jew to understand that there is no Jew in the world like Pinchas. He's a chiddush she'en kamo ba'olam. There's nobody in the world who's like you. And hamakiris makomo means that there's one of the kinyanei Torah and one of the obligations of a Jew in this world is to make sure that your opinion is your opinion and that you don't get carried away by the public opinion, and that you don't get swept away by this raging river of public opinion. Ad kidei kach that he writes in Os Yud, towards the end of the piece, he says that if I would hand out right now a photostated sheet of a piece of Rambam, and another one I would hand out and it would be a piece of Ramban. And I'll even go weiter. I'll say if I would hand out just not with the Tzur Sadaf, I would just hand out a piece of Ramban without telling you what it is, and a Rashbam. Okay, if Rambam and Ramban, you say the Rambam didn't write Al Torah. But or even, let's say I give you Chidushei Ramban al Shas, and I give you a Rambam. So the Rebbe says, Derech HaRambam, L'mashal Nikar B'Torah B'Chachma L'Atzmo, V'derech HaRamban L'Atzmo. Instantly you would say, oh, that's the Ramban, that's the Rambam. I know I know the way that's the Rambam, that's the Rashba, that's the Rashbam, that's the Ibn Ezra. They don't write the same way. They each have their own, like Chazal say, every Navi has his own way of speaking, and every Jew has their own way of speaking. And so the Rebbe says, make sure to be makir es makomcha ba'olam, not just to recognize your place, but to make. Makir means to make nikar. Like in the word, when you put a mem before, like mesiach means to make someone else speak. The makir means to make nikar, your place in the world. One of my favorite pieces, if I could have it, one of my students asked me the other day, if I have it, because I was talking about it, it's the Piacetzner Rebbe, and I was telling them something about it, none of this, but they asked if I have a favorite piece, if I have a favorite piece of Torah from the Piacetzner Rebbe. The type of kid who he wants to sum it up for me in one piece. I said, I don't have a favorite piece. I said, I have a favorite sefer of his, which is Tzav Zayers, because it's his neshama. And maybe this is it. As a batur, in the context of being a musician, maybe this is one of my favorite pieces. Also because the Rebbe knew how to give a shtach. He was very sweet, but he knew how to say strong. The Rebbe says, a person needs to know how to make ladders to climb to heaven from time to time. You see how he's writing here is very these personal entries. Person needs that the Rebbe was a big musician. He knew how to play violin beautifully. So he said people need to know how to sing and how to make a niggin. Writing a song is one of those sulamot, like Rav Freifeld in his biography. There's a story in Rav Freifeld's biography, which I think is also found in, what's his name? Rav Shmuel Brazil's book. What's it called? Achashal? No, it's a different book. B'shvili Nivra Olam, which is all about this Indian. That whole sefer is about this Indian. B'shvili Nivra Olam. The whole world is created for me. So he has a story in there about some guy. It's in Rav Freifeld. It's really about Rav Freifeld. It's Rav Freifeld's biography. That he one time met this guy who said, Rebbe, can I show you something? And he pulled out this piece of paper and it had this to-do list. And on the bottom of the to-do list, it said, write a song. And the Rebbe said, I didn't know you're a musician, And he said, that's what I wanted to show you. He said, every time I make a to-do list, I always put that on the bottom of the thing. And he said, I've been doing this for years, even though I'm not a musician, I don't know how to write a song, because I know that I have my own niggin. It's in there somewhere, and I know that I could write a song one day. So whether you're musical or not musical, he's not talking about a niggin. Lamaisa, he's not talking about a niggin. I mean, he's also talking about a niggin. After you do a mitzvah, the shema, you mamish do a mitzvah, like you overcame yourself and you gave tzedakah in a way that was beyond what you normally you dug deep for the lakshan. You dug really deep and you pulled out that and you feel a certain sense of I overcame myself. I was Kodesh Yitzri, and so channel that into a niggin. We'll believe nishbar, you're really feeling broken. Therefore, when you're singing a niggin together with your friends, sing your version of it. Sing it with your inflection. V'im lav, and this is the line. If you don't do that, if you just only sing other people's nigunim, and again, he's not talking about nigunim. If you're always in your whole life are just singing other people's nigunim, im lav rak shemenagin nigun shechiber acher bilvad. If you're just singing someone else's nigunim, harizeh kemo mayim shapalit chaveru mas. It's like swallowing someone else's spit. Kach katuv v'Rebbe Piacetzner. Shekol echad tzarich liot et atzmo. You have to be yourself. In the Chovis HaTalmidim, writing to children, and who doesn't want to be a child? Who doesn't want to return to that state of being a child? He quotes from the Shulchan Aruch. The very beginning of the Shulchan Aruch is, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid. Don't be afraid of other people laughing at you. Do what you have to do. And he writes so beautifully. He writes, Oy vavoy. That's what he writes. Oy vavoy li'ish kazeh, to a person like this. Asher maser es nafsho v'gufo b'reshus v'das anashim acherim nishchasim. God forbid to be a person who's constantly checking in to see, does this person approve of me? Does this person approve of me? Does that person approve of me? Kula moshlam alav. Everybody rules over you. V'raku ein lo shum shlita al atzmo b'saro. You have no self-advocacy. Machla ma'usahi habusha mipnei amaligim alav. That's the deepest sickness. To be embarrassed of what someone else thinks of you. Asher reishisa v'yasod v'yaldusa v'katnuso. The beginning of this happens when you're a kid. And thank God, the Rebbe says, that when you're a kid, you're constantly checking in with your parents and with your teachers and making sure that everything, and every time you step out of line, your parents make sure that you know it. And thank God that we listen to our parents when we're a kid, but at a certain point, the Rebbe says, at a certain point, oy vavoy, if you haven't learned, and that's the whole gather of the whole sefer is, If you're a teacher, if you're a parent, which all of us are, Baruch Hashem, Kin Yirbu, if you're a parent, the whole goal of parenting, the whole goal of being a Rebbe, of trying to give over something, is to know and to remind yourself over and over again that all I'm trying to do is get this person chanuch l'nar al pi darko. That the only person they should be copying is themselves, and to give them the tools to be able to stand up against the world that wants to tell them what to do, that spends billions of dollars to tell them what to do. Umisraga who limdor is kol dvarav, he makes sure to, as I was reading this piece, and I said to the guys I was speaking in Hebrew, and all of a sudden I caught myself, when I tend to give shiurim, I tend to be very self-reflective and like bear my heart on my sleeve. And as I was reading it, I said, Chevra, I just want to tell you that I'm reading this, everything that I've been reading since the beginning of the shiur until now. And when I was reading everything in Hebrew, I've been reading it with a tuf. And I daven with a suf, and I speak Hebrew with a suf, if I'm speaking to, and when I'm reading to you guys, I'm reading with a suf. And I said that I'm reading with a tuf because I'm sitting with a bunch of Israelis, and I know that you probably also speak with a suf. You probably also daven with a suf, a bunch of chareda. We all daven with suf. That's how I grew up. That's just how I grew up. And I said, I'm doing that because I want to be motzei chen beinechem. I want to find favor. I want to be one of the guys. I want to be. As I'm reading this, I was like, "Musragel hu limdor es kol dvarav." That's the line that I got up to. I said, he's weighing every word and every, everything that he does. Es kol dvarav b'minhagei das hagedolim v'asovim oto. Everyone who's sitting around him. We become like chameleons, like the Berditchever said on the pasuk, "Tmunas kol." Right? The Isser of making a pesel is al tas a pesel tmunas kol. Tmunas kol, the British says, you're tmunas kol is the pesel, to make an idolatry of like, I could be anything, I could be everything. When I'm with my friends from high school, I could be like, I'm still cool, I could still, when I'm with people who I'm already like b'nei aliyah with, and I'm like more like that. And when I'm with Americans, I'm more American. When I'm with the British, I'm more proper. Americans are uncultured. And when I'm with with the Israelis, I try to be tough, and we're just constantly tmunas kol. We're tmunas kol all the time. Limdoris dvarav b'minhagei das hagedolim v'sovim oso. Im zoses tovia b'neim. If I do this, then they'll like me. V'im koes yischchu mimeni. Then they're gonna start laughing at me. And he's talking to kids, and that's how kids are. Think for yourself. Don't worry about what the cool kid in the class is gonna do. Halavai, we should be able to transmit to our children. Be yourself. Be yourself, My kids, especially my daughter, she davens so beautifully, she makes brachos so beautifully. As soon as there's a friend around, it's like there's more of a pressure to just be. She would kill me if I said that in front of her. In Aish Kodesh, the Piacetzner talks about this in Parshas Noach, also Bashkacha Pratis, 80 years ago, Tafshin Aleph, it's Tafshin Pei Aleph. 80 years ago, Lifnim and Achom of the Warsaw ghetto, the Piacetzner got up in front of his tzibor and he said, Chevra, it's bad to be kshay oref, it's bad to be stubborn. And he's talking about how the people of the Dor Mabel, how they didn't listen to Noach, and Noach was stubborn in his ways of thinking that he couldn't change them. And he's talking about the union of being stubborn, of being kshay oref. And then the Piacetzner says, Aval inyan kshay oref hu achas hamaylos hachitovos. But to be honest with you, to be stubborn is also a very geschmack thing. It's one of the highest values, to be stubborn. Because if you're not stubborn, then you're kal. Then you're easily blown to this way or that way. You can never finish with this guy because he's constantly shifting to be one thing or another thing. Sometimes he wants to serve Hashem if he's with fellow Ovdei Hashem. Sometimes he doesn't want to serve Hashem when he's with people who are more enlightened. But he does what he does, and don't get in my way. And then the Rebbe turns to his Chevra and he says, and this is the same Rebbe who wrote in one of the pieces in Aish Kodesh, he wrote, Chevra, the Jewish people have had hard times before. You know, the Jewish people we had inquisitions, we had Rahman al-Atzam, we had things before. This is not the first time the Jewish people, like you hear people speak now. Corona is hard, we had a Holocaust, we had things like this. People say these funny ways of speaking. But the Rebbe got up in front of his tzibur and he said, Chevra, I mean, that wasn't, we've had, Corona to Holocaust, like what a crazy, okay, people bigger than me have said such things, but, but the Rebbe was mamish in it. And he said, we've had inquisitions before, we've had things like this before, Chevra, like, chazak v'amatz. And then, in one of the later years, he makes a footnote and he says, when I said that, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true. There's never been anything like this before. But that piece from the Piacetzner in Aish Kodesh. Oh, it's in Yad Vashem on that there was never anything like this before. His retraction. He says there was never anything like this before. And that was also the das of, that's the big machlokas. Maybe we'll save it for another time when we get into rabbinic disputes. That was the big machlokas between Rav Shach and the Piacetzner Rebbe. One of the big machlokas that the Piacetzner Rebbe said, after the Holocaust, all bets are off. You have to love every Avarian. There's, and you can't explain the Holocaust. And Rav Shach said, no, the Holocaust happened because people weren't following the Torah. And you have to hold the people who eat rabbits, hold their feet to the fire. And I'm not here to decide between Gedolim, but the Rebbe said that we never had anything like this before, and yet he still got up and he said, Chevra, you have to be kshei oref. When the whole world, and this is Mamish speaking to us now, in our own level, that the Rebbe said, you have to be kshei oref to find the nekudos tovos in the period that you're in. And when the whole world is saying everything's ala panim, and the whole world is insane, and I say it all the time, my wife and I say it to each other, like, what does the world come to? Like, what is happening in the world? With everything, not just with Corona. With Corona and with everything. I don't have to give examples. Everyone, kol nefesh yodea maras nafsho. Everybody knows their own bitterness. And yet a person speaks kshei oref to say, no, things are good. The world is good. The world is good. One of my dear yedidei nefesh, one of my dear friends, actually more than one of my dear friends, constantly is posting to social media, the world is good, the world is good, the world, until he runs out of characters, depending on what, the world is good, it's good, everything is good, it's going to be good. Not in a place because he's cuckoo, he's saying it dafka, he's being shei oref, because he knows that it's not so simple. And so when the whole world is saying everything is hafuch, then you have to stay shei oref and be true to yourself and say, if there are nekudos that are good in my life, I have to focus on those nekudos that are good and not get carried away with someone else's negativity. Then we come to Avram Avinu. We're coming to the end now. Come to Avram Avinu at the end of the parsha. And then Netziv has an amazing bunch of amazing Torahs. This is a theme that you find in Netziv as well in a lot of places. Where the Netziv says a wonderful hesber of the Indian of the Migdal Bavel. To really understand it, I'll just preface with 30 seconds that Rav Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin in the Sefer Pri Tzaddik in Parshas Noach explains that when Hashem wanted to bring the Mabul, this is a very famous idea from Rav Tzadok, when Hashem wanted to bring the Mabul, really he wanted to give us the Torah. The Gemara says in Chulun already, where's Moshe Rabbeinu found in the Torah? Where's Moshe Rabbeinu found in the Torah? He's found everywhere in the Torah. But the Gemara says, where's the shorish of Moshe Rabbeinu in the Torah? It's in the pasuk of Bishagam, where it talks about where Hashem says another 120 years and I'm going to destroy them. 120 is the number of years Moshe Rabbeinu lived. Bishagam is B'Gematria Moshe. That's the Gemara in Chulin. That's not the Sifrei Chasidus. That Moshe Rabbeinu is this Indian of Hashem wanted to give Matan Torah to the Arizal says the Dor Hamabel is the same neshamas that came out of Mitzrayim. But because in Mayim El Torah and we weren't Zocha, therefore it came down as a Mabul Mayim instead of coming down as Torah in Mayim El Torah. And then in another piece in Pri Tzadik a little bit later, he says, and that's also the secret of the Migdal Bavel. Because like the Ramban, he doesn't say this, but like the Ramban writes, the Mishkan is the Hemshech of Matan Torah. It's the moving Matan Torah, like the Ramban writes so beautifully and so famously. So the Netziv says that in the same way Hashem wanted to give the Torah and it came as a Mabul, Hashem wanted to give the Mishkan and it came down as Migdal Bavel. So from there you understand that the Migdal Bavel and the Mishkan are opposites from each other. So I wanted to say, why are they opposites of each other based on this Netziv? And Netziv says, what's the Migdal Bavel? Everyone was speaking Safa Achas, and they said, let's build a tower. So the Netziv Kedarka Kodesh always big Mechadish. The Netziv. If you never studied Hemek Davar, you're cheating yourself out of Olam Haba Olam Hazeh. The Netziv has unbelievable. The Netziv says that Cain killed Hevel accidentally. The Netziv says that the Nachash was jealous of Adam and Chava, that they were able to daven whenever they wanted. He has like wild chiddushim. He says wild things. I'll tell you two wild things that he says right now. The Netziv says that the Migdal Bavel was a watchtower. That everyone spoke Safa Achas, and it was a communist, Marxist society. Big brother. You speak our language, and you do what we do. And if you want to make another community outside, and you want to have something different, then we have the Migdal, we can see everything you're doing. And if you try to do something different, we'll rein you back in. We want to keep the Safa Achas. Now let your brain wander with that, and you'll see that the whole parsha unfolds. Like Hashem makes them dafka not, everyone has their own thing. And this is the exact inyan that we see, that's the hemshech of the Dor Mabul. That the state and the way that the culture decides things are going to be, that's the way it has to be. You don't get to think of an individual. It comes along Avram Avinu and says the Netziv, Pilei Playim, but Tchilason, our parents were over the Avodah Zarah, like we say in the Haggadah. In the beginning, our parents were worshiping idols also. It says in the Netziv, Avram Avinu was one of the builders of the Migdal Bavel. And he was a Baal Kishron, so Mistama, he was probably like one of the chief architects. You know? Avram Avinu was in it. And then Avram Avinu had this, after years and years of searching, Avram Avinu said, this is a terrible mistake. You know, the Netziv explains, this is the Inyan, that a brick would fall, they would start to cry. A person would fall, they would say, we lost it. But the state is still being. The individual doesn't mean anything. That's what Chazal say. So the Netziv says that Avram Avinu was one of the builders of the Migdal Bavel. And Avram Avinu said, I've had enough, I'm out. So I said, oh, you're out? Okay, you can leave. You want to leave? Pass through the fire, or costume. The whole story, the whole narrative of Avram being thrown into the fire. And Netziv says, what's the fire? You want to make bricks, you need a fire. He says, you want to walk away from the project of the Migdal Bavel, you want to be an individual, you want to swim upstream, try swimming up fire. You want to walk away, you can walk away, but you have to walk through the furnace. You want to get out of Migdal Bavel, you have to walk through the furnace. And whereas Noach was Matzachein Beinei Hashem, Avram Avinu did something totally different. Noach swam against the current. He was that oaf that was swimming against the current. But Avram Avinu was mamish, he went with such force that he mamish changed the whole current. He was like one of those, like those pools that they have in the amusement parks to let your kids, like where it's like the wave pool, where it's like Avram Avinu was mamish the wave. He like the current was going this way, and Avram was swimming against the current with such force that the current started going with Avram. He mamish changed the current. Like Rav Moshe Kabriner said that he's not surprised that Avram Avinu didn't get burned by the Kivshan Aish. He's surprised that Avram Avinu didn't burn up all of our costume. That Avram Avinu knew how to swim not only upstream, but he knew how to swim up fire. Like Rabbi Nachman writes in the Hashmatos of Likutei Maharan, and in between Chelik Aleph and Chelik Beis, there's something called the Hashmata. He has one little, think about that for a little bit. Why he put this as it's like a separate piece that bridges the two pieces of Likutei Maharan. The title of the piece is called Echad Haya Avram. Echad Haya Avram. Avram was one. Avram Avinu was single-minded against the whole world. She'avram Eved Hashem Rak Ha'yidesh Haya Echad. She'chashav B'daito Shu Rak Yechidi Ba'olam. He said, I am the only one in the world, not in an egotistical way, but I don't have to listen to anybody else except for Hashem. V'lo istakel klal b'nei ha'olam. Avram Ha'ivri, that he was on one side of the river and the rest of the world was on the other side of the river. And in this piece, Rabbi Nachman talks about how a person needs to do that. Avram Ha'etani, Avram the strong one. Ad kedei kach that Avram Avinu, like Rav Lev Yitzchak of Berdishev writes, V'hayei bracha. V'hayei bracha, says the Berdishever, V'hayei bracha, that until Avram Avinu we know that there were all these generations of Hashem was basically keeping the world going as a gift. V'hi baram, V'hei baram, Hashem created the world in the zchus of Yom Hashishi, V'hei baram, Osios Avram, like the Baal Turim writes, that the world was created for Avram Avinu because finally Avram Avinu came, there's someone who's going to keep the Torah, there's someone who's going to think for himself, who's going to actually turn this world around. V'hayei bracha, the Berditchever writes in Kedushas Levi, is that until then Hashem was keeping the world going from his name of Yud Kei Vav Kei Chesed. It was a Chesed. Yud Hey was sustaining Vav He. Yud He meaning Hashem, that's one of the names of Hashem also, was sustaining Vav He, which means creation. Until Avram Avinu came and V'hayei Bracha. V'hayei is Vav He, began to move Yud He. It almost sounds like a heretical idea. That Avram Avinu came, and Avram Avinu had to argue with Hashem. Ad Kedei Kach, that Avram Avinu was so single-minded that he was the one who was the foundation stone of everything, Ad Kedei Kach, that he couldn't be moved. You want to destroy Sodom, Hashem, I'll fight you on it. And so Avram Avinu comes and he, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'artecha misavicha, cut yourself off from everything you know and become your own person. Until finally, the Netziv says, just one last thing, the Netziv says, what's the pshat that after, I was slotted on one of the days of Rosh Hashanah to speak in somewhere. I didn't end up getting to be able to do it. And Yom Kippur also, I was knocked out because I had a virus, not coronavirus. I had a very painful shingles virus, and I had to be with myself. But one of the things I was going to talk about was this Netziv, that the Netziv says that Avram Avinu, after the Akedah, we'll really wrap up now, after the Akedah, Avram Avinu is told, there's this like funny epilogue after the Akedah. That after the Akedah, it says, Vayi achar dvar ma'eleh, and it gives like Avram's whole lineage of like, this one married this one, and they had all these children and everything, the whole thing. So the Netziv writes, what's this Vayi achar dvar ma'eleh? What happened after the Akedah? Sechadash, lo shamatem et zeh. The Netziv says, Vayi achar dvar ma'eleh after the Akedah. Ma pitom? How come after the Akedah all of a sudden Vayi achar dvar ma'eleh? So the Netziv says that Lech lecha me'artzecha me'artecha misavicha, that Avram Avinu was told, you have to leave your house, leave your family, become a yachid, become echad hayavram, become an individual. And after the Akedah, ad kedei kach, that Avram Avinu proved that I'm even willing to sacrifice my own family, my own blood, then all of a sudden, Vayi achar dvar ma'eleh, after the Akedah, Avram finally was given permission to go check back with his family. And he was finally able to hear, this one had this child, and this one got married, and then this, and there's the family, the updates of the family. Updates from the family. Because when a person becomes an individual, and a person becomes a yachid, then they're able to be motzechein b'nei Hashem and to become an individual. Hashem should bless us, like I ended the previous year, Hashem should bless us that we should be zoche. The only way to be an individual is to learn Torah, and we should be able to learn Torah together. We know that the Pesukim of Vayibin Saron are surrounded by nuns, by backwards nuns. So Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb has a very famous drasha where he talks about the fact that those nuns that surround the Vayibin Saron, the word nun in Aramaic means a fish. A backwards nun is nunin hafuchim, backwards fish that are going upstream. He has a very famous lecture that he gave in like 1976 or something like this, called Upstream, where he talks about how a person wants to be a nun hafuch, they need to be able to swim upstream, and the way to do that is through Torah, Vayibin Saron. And when a person carries the Torah with them, they know how to be true to themselves, and they know how to fight against the tide, and Hashem should help us that we should be zoch as a tzibur to continue to learn together, to be motzechein b'nei Elokim v'adam, and to be motzechein with each other, and to follow each other's good things, but to know how to be strong for ourselves, and to be makiras mekomeinu ba'olam.
You, the Dovidl, the Piacetzner